Lazarus at Abraham's side, on Abraham's bosom. If you want to understand what's going on, remind yourself of the biblical narratives of the Passover. And in particular, the last Passover, when Jesus is eating it before he goes to the cross. It looks as if it's one of those posh meals that the Jews sometimes had, where instead of standing up or sitting, they actually lay down on low mats. That was the way they did it, with a low table, and around the low table, these narrow little mats where each person leaned on an arm, and then reached onto the table, and there would be some bread at each place. And each person would take some bread, break some off, and dip it into one of the bowls of either fruit puree or meat puree. Do you see? And they would eat it themselves, or sometimes pass it to a friend and give it to a friend as part of a sharing device that indicates friendship and affection. But that meant that the person next to Jesus had his back to him. And it turns out, when you put the biblical narratives together, that the person next to Jesus was John. Peter was farther away. And at some point, Jesus says some things that startle everyone. You're in the midst of this prescribed feast of the Jews, the Passover feast. And Jesus says in a momentary lull, one of you is going to betray me. Can you imagine the electric shock? I'll bet some of them were just about to put something in their mouth and never quite made it. And others were chewing. And then a little murmur starts around the table. Surely not I, Lord. What is he talking about? And from somewhere across the table, Peter signals to John, because John is next to Jesus. He's, "Psst, ask him what he means. Ask him what he means." But of course, although John is next to Jesus, he's got his back to Jesus. So what you do in those circumstances is you push on your arm and you put your head back on the bosom of the friend next to you. That's why John is described as the one who rests his head on Jesus' breast at the Last Supper. So he pushes on his arm, puts his head on Jesus' breast, and he says, "Who is it, Lord?" And Jesus gives his response. It's the one who puts his hand in the bowl with me. Now, from our point of view, that just seems unseemly, a bit too close, a bit too cloying. Listen, if after this meal I were to go with you to the nearest McDonald's for a bite to eat, I have to tell you, you can jolly well keep your head off my breast. Yet, nevertheless, in the context of the first century, what this means is that John the Baptist is in the place of privilege, of honor. He's at Jesus' right hand. And there's a kind of intimacy and friendship that has John's head on Jesus' breast, talking him to my own familiar friend, to use a biblical expression. And that's where Lazarus is. Next to Abraham,